Permaliving Institute. Here I want to talk to you today about the energy interactions of trees. This is one of our modules for the PDC. And it's something that most people don't think about when they think about forest gardening and growing, is all the different interactions that happen within that environment. So if you take the time to really kind of look around your environment when you're in the wild, you can see the different things that happen and the many unseen things that happen. What most people look at, all they do is see the trees. And hence the quote, see the forest for the trees. So, this is my idea of the woods. This is where I grew up. I've been going to these woods since I was 5 years old. This is my property, 80 acres of pure pine land in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. This used to be all wooded until the gentleman in front of us clear cut it, which allowed me as a child to see the interactions of what happens when you clear cut forest. Get to see some edge effect, get to see some succession. Originally pine, this land is now mostly birch, which wasn't the logging area, but is part of the traditional wood growth in that area. Because of that, now we're getting maple and birch growing into our lot on the edge effect. Because one of the concepts of permaculture is edges, and the edges are where you get the most diversity and growth. So as you clear out one niche, other objects come in to fill the niche. This is the modern opinion of what energies are in wood. Trees. Trees turn into that. Logging. Devastation, clear cutting, things that most people don't see on a daily basis. But we continue to do it because out of sight, out of mind. Comparatively to the Amazon or other giant, bigger forests where we're clear cutting on even higher levels than traditional logging, it's exponentially worse. We're losing carbon, we're losing oxygen, and we're losing natural environments and microclimates. That turns into this. That turns into this. Most people see this and they think of what?
Firewood.
Firewood, exactly. That is most people's ideas of trees after they're cut down. That's their only use, firewood. I'm going to go camping, I'm going to burn some wood. There's many different versions, or many different options that you can use with wood, but firewood is just the traditional answer. You can use it for hugelkultur beds, you can use it for biomass, you can use it for building, log cabins, which is the other option that most people see. But then you get this, which is what even more people see when they look at wood, when you see trees and the energy interactions. This is the end product for most people as to what's going to happen with trees and energy usage. You're going to build a house, you're going to build a shed, you're going to build a garage. The forest has a lot more going on. There's a lot more interactions, a lot more energy going on. Sorry. We have to change the house. What energy interactions do you see in the woods? Anybody? What kind of energy interactions are going on in the forest, in the trees?
Sunlight. We've got moss growing in shade, the wet sides of the trees. I mean, you've got a variety of things going
Anything
on.
else?
A lot of water moving through the system,
Yeah,
transpiring.
water.
Looks like trees are going from the wind.
We have carbon growth. Trees collect sun, solar energy, turn it into carbon, pull carbon out of the air, grow mass. We get carbon growth. We've got the energy interactions of the animals who live in these trees. Animals live in these trees, they deposit their nitrogen, which then provides fertilizer for the forest. It's another energy interaction that the trees support. Anything else?
Not that you see this, but bringing nutrients up and bringing.
Nutrient growth, yeah. By defoliation, leaves fall, deciduous trees, they create mulch and fertilizer in the ground, which helps grow the microorganisms in the ground, which fertile soils, another concept that we need to really work on is rebuilding our soils. And that's the first step. Forest gardens will do that for us in ways that just composting won't. What is one of the least talked about transactions of energy within trees? Anybody?
Tell us.
Condensation.
Oh,
Condensation is one of the biggest energy transactions in trees that we don't ever consider. It's hard to measure. That's why we don't hear about it. Because measuring condensation can be almost impossible. And you think of all the different interactions in the tree, in the roots, in the soil. Leaf size. How big is a leaf? Obviously, this is depending on what tree you're talking about. Some leaves are giant, some leaves are tiny. But how would you measure a leaf? What kind of methods would you use scientifically to measure the size of a leaf?
Metric.
You would use a ruler, tape
Mhm.
measure, something like that, right? That's measure the size of the leaf, and that's your circumference. But if you look closer, what do you see?
veins.
Veins, edges, right? Edges. We're back to the edge effect, the permaculture edge effect. All of these edges, when you add up all the different edges, and if you zoomed in further, you'd see even smaller edges. It's called a fractal. When you zoom in, it's a repeating pattern in nature, happens a lot. If you zoom in on a tree, a large tree can have up to 40 acres of water vapor interaction. One large tree, 40 acres of water vapor interaction.
Wow.
Again, that brings us into patterns. Patterns is another permaculture concept that we talk about. This is obviously leaf, charcoal, and coral. Now, charcoal is known to be used as bacterial growth. Bacterial condos is what I like to call it. It's put that in there, you put that in your compost, and it gives the bacteria all the little different places to live. Now think about how many acres of space are in that one piece of charcoal. And then you look at the edges in this coral. Think about how many miles of edge effect are just in that one little piece of coral. If you laid it all out end to end, how many miles you would get. And these are all the patterns that we need to see on a smaller basis. When you open your eyes and really start observing, which is another permaculture concept, you tend to see a lot of things that are hidden or not really noticed. Condensation is a lot bigger than what most people think. Trees can collect so much condensation that they literally will drip all night long. So if you put your house on an edge with the forest over top, and the condensation collects, if you have a metal roof, you're going to hear it all night. You're going to think it's raining. Literally dripping. How many times have you walked out in the middle of the night, gone across the grass, and your feet are wet? When you go under a tree, you're going to get even more wet. No.
Sometimes when you live in a tent under a tree.
Same effect.
Mhm.
So we have somebody who's experiencing that person personally right now, that you'll hear water condensation collecting and dripping down, even though it's not raining. Now, the important condensation is big in humid areas, but it's much larger in drier climates. What you can do with dry climates is once you get your trees established, they will continue to produce condensation, which then produces moisture, which then produces the oxygen to grow more food, grow more plants, and continue that cycle. So really the value of condensation is higher in drier climates than humid climates, but it's still much more beneficial than what we think. What happens when the rain falls on the trees? Anybody know what the hydraulic cycle of a tree is? Becky? What's the first thing that happens?
Oh, I'm sorry. I don't know what part of the cycle you're talking about.
The very first thing when the hydraulic cycle of a tree, when the tree senses that the rain is coming,
Mhm.
the water vapor builds up in the air. So you get higher
Oh,
humidity,
okay.
correct?
Yeah.
So when you get higher humidity, the tree says, okay, it's gonna rain. So the leaves start standing up. Some leaves will even flip over. And the reason for this is it's gonna catch the rain. Now, the way a tree drinks is the water hits the leaves, and because it's going up, it starts going down the veins. All those little patterns that we saw before, the water will drip down the center, down the twigs, down the branches, and then down the trunk. And as that fills up and gets all the way to the bottom, the tree then wakes up, and the leaves producing water actually starts the hydraulic pump that gets the pump from the bottom, pulling the water up through the tree. So without leaves, no hydraulic cycle. Which is why people talk about the leaves of the tree, it dies. On top of the fact that it doesn't get any more carbon. Now, trees are nutrient collectors. Yet another energy interaction of trees. Water catchment underneath the canopy is 50 times higher in nutrient than the rain itself. Which means if you put a barrel underneath the tree in a rainstorm, the rain that comes down through the tree will actually raise up to 50 times higher nutrient level than the actual rain outside of the canopy. Why? Anybody?
Picking up nutrients from.
It picks up nutrients from the wind. As your edge effect, back to the edge again, the wind comes in and will slow down from 100% wind to 25 to 50%. So automatically it cuts the speed of the wind in half. And when the wind is going, it's carrying little microparticles of nutrient. So if it's going really fast and it stops, it starts dropping because it doesn't have the energy to continue to carry that. So as it hits the trees collect that nutrient. And as the hydraulic cycle starts, the water will pull all that nutrient and run it down. Oftentimes in rainstorms, when you see if it's been really dry, you'll see water going down the trunk after it's been raining for a little while. You'll see water going down the trunk, and that needs to be frothy. And that's just all pulling that nutrient off the leaves, off the branches, off the trunk, and start running it down to the ground. But the purpose of that is to feed the ground around that particular tree, especially under the canopy, which is why it catches that, which is why the nutrients is so high. Kind of next to that, the root system on the trees grows directly underneath the canopy, which is why when you mulch a tree, you should mulch the size of the canopy that you expect for the tree. If you can, if you're in a backyard, obviously you've got to compensate for that. But if you mulch all the way around that, that's where the root system are going to grow. Now, 15% of the root mass on a tree is within the first 2 feet of the soil. That is also where all the little microfeelers are, where it gets all the little nutrients, the interactions with the bacteria that bring the nutrient to it. Everything else is taproot, that's where it drinks water further down, gets some minerals. So the canopy, again, dropping that into that specific area. Which I just covered. Sorry. Trees are hydraulic pumps. One of the common mistakes that people make, they put a dam into an area, they have their catchment zone. Now, in order to get their catchment zone, or get their dam filled up, they'll cut all the trees down to their catchment zone. Well, what happens? You can fill an entire dam just by cutting down those trees. Because what happens is as soon as you cut all the tops of those pumps off, the water from the roots has nowhere to go up. So it fills back into the soil and will actually fill your dams. Good deal, right? Except, that's a one-time event.
Yeah.
After that, you're going to suffer flood and drought effect because the canopy and the trees are actually monitoring that energy and they're slowing it down and keeping it an even keel. Without that, you're getting the energy just flowing in, flooding, and then drought. It only get rain effect, the same thing as concrete at that point. Sorry, I skipped missing a sheet here.
Looks like our backyard.
Pardon?
Looks like our backyard.
Looks like your backyard, yes, we saw one of those the other day, didn't we? What is the nitrogen hierarchy of a legume tree? Again, this is another interaction. It's nitrogen. Certain plants, legumes, produce nitrogen. Most beans and peas will do it. Not all. And not all trees that aren't bean and peas do not. Nature's never going to give you a guarantee one way or the other, so she likes to throw a curveball for you. The very first is the seed. That's the highest in nitrogen. Your seeds on your pods are going to be your highest nitrogen. Pods are second. And as you can see, it kind of goes as it's going down the list. It goes down. The reason we have twigs and wood separately is that on legume trees, twigs tend to be a little more herbaceous and less woody. So again, you'll have more nitrogen coming out of the twigs than you will out of the wood because of that reason. Anything that tends to be a little nitrogen based or tends to be a little more herbaceous, a little less woody. which is why if you want to grow trees with more leaves or even plants with more leaves, use more of a nitrogen base in your compost. Because that keeps that growth, it lights the fire. Nitrogen lights the fire growth. So, back to the day. Let's get to the root of the matter. What happens underneath the soil?
Great picture.
Pardon?
Great picture.
What are we looking at?
This is, it's a mycorrhizal growth stem. It's fungi. It's the actual stuff that controls the woods. This goes underneath the wood. They can go up to 1,500 meters away from a tree, down or sideways, to harvest minerals and nutrients, which is part of the bacterial interaction between trees. What happens is bacteria and fungi will exchange different things with the plants for starch. It's kind of a little social economy that plants have. They built. Without it, it falls apart, the bacteria die, and other bacteria carry them away. Like the nitrogen, if you chop and drop a tree for a nitrogen tree, which is a common practice for permaculture, chop and drop a tree, use that as fertilizer. Cut it down, let it grow, and a lot of legume trees will grow right back up really rapidly. And that way you automatically put that nitrogen. But what happens is when you do that, the bacteria in the soil have no more interaction, they're not getting any more starch. So they let go of the tree and they start dying off. Well, then other bacteria will come around, carry them away, or other microorganisms will carry them away, drag them further away, but they have short lifespans, so they die. And then the cycle continues and it starts spreading out the nitrogen and the nutrients throughout the environment. Coincidentally, bacteria are so small that they will fall through the soil. Anybody have any idea how they stop that from happening?
Cation exchange?
Kind of. They create the starch exchange for the minerals, and they use the starch to make a gel. And that gel clumps them together, which is why when you see a clumpy soil, it's very high in micronutrients, because that's actually the sign of the gel in the soil. So that way, they have more to land on and they won't wash out through the soil. Back to the fungi. Fungal communication. What do trees have to say? Testing is simulated. They did a test that simulated bug damage, insect damage, on one tree in a grove. They hooked up all kinds of sensors, the roots and the leaves, and just to see what would happen. Now when they started simulated insect damage on one side of the grove, the trees on the far end started producing more tannins. Now tannins help make that bitter taste, and they did that to stop insects from eating themselves. So the communication theory was that one tree senses damage and allows all the other trees in the grove to stop so that the entire grove doesn't die. Curious about this, they start looking at the roots. They dig up the roots, just on the surface, and they see that one tree root is connected to the other tree, actually connected, almost like the same living organism. And so on down the line. So they got a little more curious. And they start looking, and one tree is connected to another tree of a different species. So you can have an apple tree and a pine tree completely connected like it's the same tree, sharing information and interfacing with each other, allowing them to know what's going on. I think that's pretty damn cool.
Yeah.
So the studies are just now getting into fungal communication, tree communication, and it's a really fascinating subject to me. And to think that this entire grove could possibly just be one organism. Just like your liver's not your heart, but it's still part of you. And they still communicate, and they're still part of the same thing. So, what does the forest say to you? And that's what I want you to take away from this. After this, I'm going to show you a little short video. But I want you to take away, I want you to look, next time you're in the woods or nature, just really look and observe the interactions, and see what the forest says to you, because it says something different to everybody. To me, it's like a church. I go and I'm relaxed. You go in the woods for 20 minutes and you're completely calm, which is actually another study that they're doing that says that the interaction of nature takes away from all the concentrated focus within the city life, and it allows your mind to just relax, kind of like meditation. I'm gonna put this movie on. I want you to check it out.
The connections between the roots is one of the main reasons why the Dutch elm disease spread so quickly back in the 60s.
My research does show that they're communicating. Yes, it's a method of communication.
Do you know her?
These
No,
plants are
I have seen this,
really
but not.
not individuals in the sense that Darwin thought they were individuals competing for survival of the fittest. In fact, they're interacting with each other, trying to help each other survive.
Interacting. Again, it's another concept that most people don't get. The fact that they really are talking to each other.
And trying to help each other survive. That's interesting.
Living as a community, not as an individual.
Well, I'm a forester, specialized into looking at below ground communities. We found that these fungi actually will connect one plant to another plant. Okay, so this tree here has got roots growing out everywhere, and as we get further away from the tree, we're more likely to find its roots, the ones that are involved in this trade. This is where the fungi hunt or scavenge for nutrients. So the tree sends down its carbon, it goes through the root system and through into these fungi, and there's an interface between the root cortical cells and the fungal cell that's wrapped itself around that cortical cell, and that's where this exchange goes on. So meters away, you can have one plant connected to another plant, and they're just shuffling carbon and nitrogen back and forth according to who needs it.
Again, that cooperative community base where trees are doing something we should be doing as people.
Oh, there's a direct correlation.
The mother trees we think of as the big old trees. They catch your eye when you walk into a forest. This Douglas fir is about 500 years old. It's a massive tree that will have an enormous network associated with it. So you can think of this as a mother tree. You know, it's in the sense that it's a dominant tree in the forest. It's probably networked into all of the trees all around it, even though they're of different species. So this tree is probably linked over to trees as far as you can see. It's just that there are trees in between that are the bridges for the network.
Which if you look at that in the basis of modern technology, that's exactly how the internet is set up. It's a cluster of different servers that translate information. So John's computer in California goes through 5 other computers before it gets to Iowa. And that's exactly the way that this is set up. So subconsciously, we've managed to set up electronic networks to be the exact same as how the fungal networks are set up underneath the trees.
Forest ecosystems are really complex systems, just like the Earth is a complex system, the biosphere. And the way it works is that we have all these parts, and all these parts are working together, like the fungus is working together with the tree. It's a lot like how our brains work. In neural networks, our brains are comprised of neurons and axons, and these neurons are physically related, but they're also almost metaphysically related because they're sending messages back and forth and they're building upon each other. It works a lot like a forest ecosystem. So in this forest, the fungus and the tree working together allows lots of structure. That structure is expressed in species diversity or structural diversity of the forest. And that diversity is really what gives the forest resilience. The resilience to withstand unexpected events like a fire that might come through, or an insect, or a windstorm. Well, somebody's going to be left standing because there's a diversity there. Some of the forest practices that we have done pay no attention to the role of these mother trees, or that trees actually will move some of their legacy to the new generation. We didn't pay attention to it. Instead, what we did is we went and cut down those trees after they died so that we could make 2x4s out of them. And we didn't give them a chance to give back to the community, I don't think. So what those dying trees will do is that they will also move resources into living trees, to the young ones coming up before they completely collapse. So it's a transfer, like a passing of the wand from one generation to the next, if we allow it to happen.
Pretty cool. Any questions?
I was curious, that picture you had that I asked about had the mycorrhizal on it, I believe that's what it was.
Yes.
It just looked like it was growing out on the top of the ground.
It may have been, but it was probably just picked up for a piece for photographic use. But if you go into the woods and lift back leaf litter, you can find fungus just growing like that. And that's the whole surface of the soil base in most forests are full of mycorrhizal and fungal interaction, and it helps break down the wood. So that's how trees break down. Fungus come in, that's where you see your mushrooms. That's actually the mushroom. The fruiting body that most people eat when they think of mushrooms is just, it's reproduction. Everything else is growing underground, and that whole connection is one solid piece. The largest living organism, I think, is in Oregon, and it's miles of just a fungal mat underneath the woods.
It was in Michigan.
No, not in Michigan. It's Oregon or Washington. I think it's Oregon.
Oh, okay, there's something that I read about in Michigan too.
Anything else? Okay. Then I'd like you next time,
I was gonna clap.
then I'd like you to seriously consider next time you go into the woods, just think about all the interactions that go on and what do the trees say to you?